the way in which the city was evolving. This is probably not unique to Pune in the sense that this was the time when many cities, whether it's Pune, Bangalore, they were all cities that had a certain charm, had a certain character, and it was beginning to change. And so these people came together, wanted to understand what is changing the city. They wanted to expand their own horizons to understand things that are happening not only at the level of the city, but what's happening around us that is also impacting the way cities are evolving. They were very interested in issues of the environment in general that were already beginning to come to the forefront. Remember, this was a time when environment was not a topic, was not a subject. There was no Ministry of Environment. Not that the ministry coming has made much difference to the environment, but it just goes to show that it wasn't even on the radar of the government at that time. But there were discussions happening at the international level. They were definitely influenced by that. But they wanted to get to the root of why certain things are happening in the city. Parisar works on issues that are related to the environment in general. But in Pune, not surprisingly, the biggest impact on the city happens for a couple of different reasons, but one of them we think is traffic, which is what Rishikesh mentioned in the beginning, that's something that we feel at a visceral level on a day-to-day basis, right? Every single day we step out, we feel the impact of that traffic. It's also a topic that is discussed a whole lot. And so one of the founders of Parisar, Sujit Patwardhan, was very interested in understanding the connection between traffic and transportation and what happens in the city. We were interested in saving green spaces, heritage buildings, and so on and so forth. And a lot of these things were being threatened by the by issues related to traffic and transportation. So we wanted to understand this a little bit better, and that's where that evolution started. So what I'm going to do is I am going to spend maybe the first half an hour or so on just trying to understand this connection. This is sort of a distillation of that understanding. And I think I've already received some questions that Rishikesh shared with me. There may be more questions. I think we can also give preference to the questions of people who are attending physically. But basically I would want those questions to be against the background of what I'm going to first present, because I think this background will be super important to try and understand this issue a little bit better. So, yes. So this is, so what I'm trying to get to through this presentation is understanding a vision for the city. We really think it's about how you envision your city. What kind of a city would you like to have? This is something that we all know. This picture is very iconic. Everybody knows what building this is. And it looks a certain way. This, on the other hand, is also an extremely rich country. This is a rich country. We all know probably what country this is. But this, by the way, is also an extremely rich country with sort of advanced levels of thinking around this. This looks like what? Lakshmi Road? Something like that. But you could go to any city in India and you'd probably find a street like this. And the point that I'm trying to make over here is that there seems to be, at least the way I'm looking at it, more similarity between this photo and this photo than there is between this one and this one. So there's something more similar about this to this than it is to this. And can quickly someone point out to me what is common in these two which is not in this?
You can see a lot of pedestrians.
Population density, pedestrians, people and public transport. So this seems to be devoid of people. And actually my first slide was about creating a people-friendly vision for the city. So I really want to put people at the center of what we're talking about. So this is what we have. This is probably some city in Europe. I don't know if it's Amsterdam or Copenhagen or something. It's one of those. Other than the people, also you will notice a couple of other things which I'll point out perhaps later on, but also look at the scale of the buildings. This is something that architects will like to talk about more than transport people. But you do not have things like this in cities like this, which is to say that the built environment is more accessible, amenable to people. You can actually see it. You don't feel lost in this kind of a building structure. So this is the kind of urban form that these people have selected. Yeah. There is no doubt that our cities are in trouble. One of the issues is that, and this is not what we're going to talk about today, but just to set the context, what is about 30 to 40% of people in our cities live in these conditions. That's one thing that I wanted to point out. In cities like Mumbai, it's close to 50%. If you don't have that, you sometimes have this. Doesn't look very nice. And there is often a word that is used for this. What's the word that comes to mind? Concrete jungle. So that's something that we all know. The other thing that is very strange about cities, or is quite common about cities, is that we are big consumers of resources. Cities consume water, cities consume a lot of goods, and we basically generate a lot of waste. We don't like to deal with that waste, so often we dump that waste outside. So cities are often doing this, not just Indian cities, but quite frankly cities around the world. This was true of Los Angeles, and right now also I think I just recently read an article about Mumbai, how it is drying up the villages around it because it's just sucking up all that water. This happened in Los Angeles a lot. These cities are often powerful, they're politically powerful, they're able to grab resources, and they're able to reduce the conditions of living around them. In fact, a lot of towns around Los Angeles lost so much water that they became dust bowls. So this is not uncommon. Next. Next. So what we're going to talk about is, as Rishikesh mentioned, we're going to talk about traffic and transportation. And when we talk about traffic, the first thing that comes to our mind is that it's a mobility crisis, right? When he talked about the traffic problem, he basically mentioned it took us a long time, or took several of you a long time to get from where you were to this location. So the mobility crisis is what usually gets highlighted whenever we talk about traffic and transportation. And what does that mean? There's severe congestion, so it takes a long time for you to get from point A to point B. There's usually a conflict between multiple modes, and one of the things that's unique about Indian traffic is this. If you go abroad, you will often not find so many modes. So we have a huge number of modes over here. There are three-wheelers, there are cars, there are tempos, there are two-wheelers, there are handcarts. There's a whole menagerie of modes over here which are all conflicted with one another. And essentially which is essentially what we mean by congestion at the end of the day, is that average traffic speeds are low. And so we're talking about average traffic speeds that can be as low as 10 kilometers per hour. The reason why I wanted to talk about this is because the issue with traffic and transportation is not just this. There are several other issues, and often they get neglected. So when you're trying to find the solution to a problem, you should first define the problem really well. If you define the problem poorly, then your solution to that, or the policy that you develop for that, is also going to be not complete. It's not going to be comprehensive. So if this is the only problem we try to solve, we will not be solving the full problem. We'll be only solving part of the problem. So what are some of the other issues related to to traffic and transportation. Before I go to the next slide, okay. I was going to ask the people about it, but ठीक है. So air pollution is in fact one of the major issues that emanates from the problem that we have. We have a traffic problem. I haven't said what that problem is. Congestion is one of them, but air pollution is the other problem. There are 132 cities in India that have been declared as non-attainment cities. So what have they not attained? There are national ambient air quality standards. These cities have failed to meet those national ambient air quality standards. There are 132 cities. Frankly, it's every city in India. I mean, the more cities that set up air quality monitoring, the more cities become non-attainment. It's also useful to know that the Indian air quality standards are quite low. Europe and America and other advanced nations, they have much more stringent air quality standards. Our standards are low and yet very few cities meet them. It's that bad. Now, this is not just an issue of, oh, my throat itches, I feel a little discomfort because of air pollution. Air pollution is a killer. And in fact, it's a little more tricky to quantify the impacts of health on health due to air pollution. So you have to do slightly more involved studies. But those studies show, don't go forward. Those studies show, and Lancet is one such journal that publishes them. There's a very big study that happens, which is called the WHO Global Burden of Disease Study. It gets published, I think, every couple of years. And it's an extremely detailed study. Actually, the government of India is involved in that study. And this study shows that, you won't believe this, but 6.7 lakh deaths every year are attributable to outdoor air pollution. I'll tell you when to go next. To outdoor air pollution. Now, pollution is not caused only by traffic. That is true. There are other sources of pollution also. But two things. In cities, often transport or traffic is one of the major contributors to air pollution. It is often contributing to the more dangerous elements of the pollutants in the air. So the things that get burnt in vehicles are particularly bad. The smaller the particle size that gets created, the more impact it has on your health. It can go deeper into your body. A lot of those are created by pollution that emanates from vehicles. So therefore, pollution is another huge issue that we have to solve if we are to say that we're trying to solve the traffic and transportation problem. Now you can go to the next slide. The other issue with traffic and transportation, again, which we forget about, thankfully the media doesn't allow us to forget, because recently there's been a spate of news about this issue, which is how safe are our streets. And in fact, road safety has been a huge issue. I don't know how many of you know this, but so this is the international number. More than 1 million people get killed in road crashes every year. Most of these people are young people. See, this is the difference between disease and road crashes. Diseases usually, not that we find that acceptable, but diseases usually kill people who are more vulnerable. It could be very small children, it could be the elderly, it could be people who have other comorbidities. Road crashes kill young people in their prime. These people should not be dying. So road crashes takes away, if you want to think about it in economist term, it takes away people who are most productive in society. They're contributing to the GDP. And so therefore, road crash impacts are also often measured in terms of the impact that it has on the country's GDP. Does anyone know quickly off the top of their head how many people do you think die in India in road crashes? This is the international number. 10 million. So 1.25 million every year internationally. So India is going to be much smaller than that, one would hope.
50 lakhs?
Huh? 50 lakhs is 5 million. So no, it can't be more than 1.25 million.
Pune has one death per day.
Pune has 1 death per day. That's a good way of putting it. So about 300 deaths in Pune every year. We lose about 1.5 lakh people every year in road crashes.
50,000.
So, 1.5 lakh, 150,000 people. These are all young people. And so, in about 10 years, you lose about 15 lakhs. That's about Pimpri Chinchwad. Sort of wiped out because of road crashes. There are countries now where road crash deaths are zero. So it's a huge problem for us. In fact, our Minister of Roads and Highways, although he's been very successful in building a lot of roads and highways, has been on record saying my biggest failure has been to not being able to reduce the number of people dying in road crashes. Next. Next. So about 1.5 lakh people die in road crashes. About 3 times as many people are severely injured. These are people who will be in the hospital for months. Many of them will be permanently disabled. Many of them will suffer economic losses which are extremely high. They will lose their jobs. They will go into a debt burden because of the amount of money that they will spend getting treated for this. 13,000 deaths in Maharashtra. Maharashtra is number 2 in the country. I think UP is number 1. And not surprisingly, most victims are in fact pedestrians and cyclists. Not as many cyclists because I think the number of cyclists itself is declining, but pedestrian deaths are increasing rapidly in our country, and so are two-wheeler deaths and injuries. So two-wheelers are considered particularly vulnerable. There's very little you can do if you get into a crash. They're also very prone to be in crashes. So my point being that as you're trying to look at it, trying to solve the traffic and transportation problem, you need to address this problem also. So you can't have a unidimensional solution to any kind of an issue. And the other thing that people talk about, and we also feel at some level, many of you are young, but some of you aren't, you feel the way the city has changed. And this is what we sort of think about in terms of the quality of life. Residential neighborhoods are getting more and more traffic. It's harder to walk in your own neighborhood. Green spaces are disappearing. Noise levels are going up. The general sense of not having a good quality of life is also because of traffic and transportation. So these are the 4 dimensions that I wanted to lay out in front of you when we talk about traffic and transportation problems. So how did this all begin? So this is how it all began. So we'll go back a little bit. This was a time, good times, when there were no cars, no motorized vehicles. So what do you see? No, go back. What do you see? So you see people, so lots of pedestrians, so people used to walk, and public transport, believe it or not. So even at that time, this is probably Chicago, and this is the L of Chicago. Oh, Detroit. Is that Detroit? Yeah. So a lot of these cities, we often think of American cities as not having public transport. American cities had public transport, rail-based public transport, and of course, non-motorized transport, meaning horse buggies also. That was quite common. Cities used to have that. And so this is how people walked, people got around cities. This is what we had, walking and public transport. Though there were a lot of, so horses were quite common in cities at that time. And while horses were great in general, horse buggies, etc., as the density of people went up, there were more horses in cities. Turns out that horses and cities are also a bit of a problem. So horses are not great in the sense that they also produce pollution. If anybody has been to Mathेरान, you know what I'm talking about. It can be a major issue. So there's basically horse dung all over the city. In summer, it gets hot. A lot of this horse dung then starts getting suspended in the air. Horses used to die. They used to lie on the side of the streets for a couple of hours or maybe even a day until the city came and picked it up. So it was not great. So people were already getting pretty fed up of horses in cities, and so they got replaced by something that was called the iron horse and something on this side. Anybody want to venture a guess as to who this gentleman might be? Good guess, Henry Ford. It isn't. Somebody who invented the car actually even before. Henry Ford was great because he started the conveyor belt system of production. But this was the guy who actually came up with the idea. He's Mr. Benz. Mercedes-Benz wala Benz. So the car, yes. And so the car has changed a little bit since then. But surprisingly, the bicycle hasn't. I mean, yes, of course, we have much fancier cycles now and whatnot. But the basic shape and concept of a cycle has remained largely unchanged. It was quite interesting. And so these two things, they both came about at almost exactly the same time. So sometimes if people say, cycles are old-fashioned, outdated, car naya hai, not really. They both came about at, I think even the year is the same. I forget what year it is. But that's the time when both of these inventions came and they transformed cities. Next slide. So very quickly you saw this. So still lots of people walking, but public transport was still there, still rail-based, a lot of tram. We had this in Mumbai until quite recently, but lots of cycles. Cycles became very dominant in cities. They sort of became very, very popular. There were certainly cars, and this was the picture that emerged. This is not dissimilar from the picture that emerged in cities like Pune, and I'll talk about it a little bit later on. But basically you went from walk, tram, horses disappeared. Almost overnight, horses disappeared. They were just gone from the ecosystem. And the entire ecosystem around horses, people making saddles and horse feed and God knows what else, all gone. Horses were gone. And so it was cycles and cars. And now, of course, we know that the poor cycle is also disappearing and we're only left with the cars. So that's sort of been this is a very sort of sketchy overview of how things have evolved in terms of cities. Yeah, next slide. So how does one deal with cars? So we are talking about policy, right? We want to talk about policy. What is the policy or what has been the policy for cities? Not just in India, but elsewhere also. What's the policy? How do I deal with something? This has been the unwritten policy. Sadly, this is also what we are doing right now. So it's also the policy that's being followed right now. What is that policy? It's not much of a policy, it's sort of a line of a thought, but this is then what drives policy. It's that the city is growing, there's going to be a growth in the number of vehicles. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. So the city must provide to accommodate these increase in vehicles. What do we have to do? I have to provide for road space for them to move around. I have to provide for space for them to be parked. I have to make sure there's fuel supply, there's service stations, everything has to be there in order to cater to this growth. And economists will call this supply side solutions, right? So you're talking about supply side solutions. I have to keep supplying to a growing problem. So this is the policy. Is this a good policy? Let's see if this is a good policy. Next slide. But tells you, okay, maybe this is not a good policy. A lot of people will say roads haven't increased. Don't be fooled by that. The amount of area under roads, you don't have to have a new road. Those may not have been very many new roads themselves. Most of the roads existed. But road space has definitely gone up substantially. These are all narrow roads which were widened. New roads have been created, new connectors have been created. We're on the cusp of talking about a brand new road which is supposed to connect us from Balbharati to Paud. So certainly new roads are also being constructed. So it's not as if And people also talk about population growth. Oh, population बढ़ रहा है, no people, so therefore we haven't kept up. But it's not true. Population growth rates, believe it or not, in cities isn't very high. For Pune, the annual growth rate is about 2%. Not phenomenal. There are examples of urbanization in other countries where urbanization rates have been extremely high. In fact, India has lamented the slow rate of urbanization, if you believe it or not. I mean, you have to look at urban people who study this and they say urbanization in India has been slow. So it hasn't been very much in terms of the population. And so road surface has definitely increased. What has gone up tremendously is not the population, but the number of motorized vehicles. So what has grown are the number of vehicles. And I think many of you, if you reflect upon your own locality, I mean, many of you are too young to do that, but in the building that I lived in, same number of people in my building, but there were hardly any cars way back in the mid-80s. But now almost everybody has a car, couple of two-wheelers, some people have 2 cars. So the number of people hasn't gone up. What has gone up is the number of vehicles themselves. So it's not a population problem, it's a population of the cars problem or vehicles problem. And of course the share of public transport in all of this has therefore dropped tremendously. This may be a little outdated, I haven't updated it in a while, but Mumbai has about 5 times the population of Pune. It doesn't have 5 times the number of vehicles as Pune. Pune has a huge number of vehicles. I'm not sure if Pune has more vehicles than Mumbai, but probably about close. And it shouldn't be too difficult to guess why that's the case. How can Mumbai operate with much fewer vehicles? And I think you already have the answer to that. What is the problem with the supply side policy? The problem is this. Vehicles want to increase, there's always a latent demand in society. People are driving, more vehicles, the policy kicks in, more vehicles, I must provide more parking, I must provide more roads, I must provide all the things that cater to it. I must increase the infrastructure, the latent demand goes up, the number of vehicles keeps going up. It's as if the more you build, the more you encourage vehicles to start driving. Sort of attracts more vehicles. You build more roads, you get more vehicles, you go, oh, not enough roads, so I build more roads, so I get more vehicles, and you get into a vicious circle. And the mayor of Bogota likened this policy to this. Trying to solve traffic jams by building more roads is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Is there any evidence for this? Yes. I didn't know, but Dubai has traffic congestion at peak hours. This is Los Angeles. This is not an interstate highway. These are urban roads. These are urban highways. They connect one part of the city to another part of the city. Los Angeles is a sprawled out city. It has to be sprawled out because people want to have cars and bungalows, so it keeps spreading out. So everyone now has a car, but there wasn't a work from home at that time. So people would then have to travel to central Los Angeles to work. So they needed a road. They need these kinds of roads. This is what people travel on every day. This is your everyday commute. I can't count the number of lanes on this urban highway. So on some of the roads here, they're saying, 2 lanes is not enough, we need 3. And I'm like, is 3 going to be enough? Well, we may need 4. Are you sure 4 is going to be enough? Well, we may need 5. I don't know. You should look at America to see how not to do this. This is the number of lanes required, and which is why I wanted to show you that picture of the number of people living in slums in our cities. Where's the land? Where is this going to come from? What are you going to demolish in order to create this infrastructure? And it still looks pretty congested. People in Los Angeles say they are still facing commute problems. They're stuck in traffic. I used to live in New Jersey for a while, and I used to travel towards New York City, and I used to be stuck in traffic. And these are the kinds of roads that I used to travel on. Yeah. People will often say, and which is why I'm showing these photos, that the reason why we have congestion is because people drive in a very indisciplined manner. लोग कैसे भी चलाते हैं, lane discipline नहीं होता है. These are the standard things. There is all lane discipline over here. It doesn't make a difference to congestion. You're just standing in neater lines, fair enough. But it's all congested. Go back. We often found this, you'll find this in places like Bangkok, the cars will be in line, but the motorcyclists are not going to be in line over there also. They'll split lanes and they'll try to go forward. So discipline has nothing to do with it. It's a space issue. There's just not enough space to accommodate these cars. It doesn't matter whether they're in line or not. Frankly, our indiscipline reduces congestion a little bit because we pack in a lot more. It's not safe, but it's what it is. So go back. The reason I wanted to show this is that there was evidence to show that a new lane gets filled up in 5 years. This was US-based research. I'm pretty sure in India this will not hold up. It probably takes us 5 years to build that road, especially environmental activists trying to go to court and stopping things, etc. Some of them are sitting here. And our growth rates are higher, definitely compared to European and American cities, what it means is that by the time it's even built, it's probably going to get open to congestion itself, which has been the case in many infrastructure projects in India, where you build a flyover and just 6 months, a year later, that flyover is already congested. So you sort of see this.
Excuse me, you were talking about Dubai.
Yes.
Any significant point on that?
The point being that it looks like they have less people, lot of land, so they shouldn't have a problem. But again, if you're having a car-centric policy, then no matter how many lanes you have, and they certainly have the money to do it, if everybody wants to travel at the same time at peak hours, you're still going to get congestion. So there has to be some other solution to that. Yeah, thanks. So when Henry Ford says this, that's scary. I mean, this guy made his fortune on cars, and he was like, I'm not so sure cars are good in cities or in busy places. We often build flyovers and we say, ये flyover का design गलत था. This is what we kept hearing at the university itself, that it was not, there should have been one more arm. इधर से और एक चाहिए था, यहाँ से एक चाहिए था, वो गलत कर दिया. How many arms, from where to where? I feel it's very dangerous to challenge engineers. They come up with shit like this, I mean, they will engineer the heck out of something. Again, these are very car-centric cities. I don't know where the Hathgadi wala will go in any of this. Kahan se dhaklega, kya karega, no idea. So, I don't know that adding more arms to a flyover, if they start talking about this, I get very scared. This is the logical conclusion to that part. Yeah. Then we don't have enough parking, right, in our buildings. I used to live in Chicago for a while. These are called the corn cob buildings because they look like corn cob, makkah. And a lot of old buildings in old parts of Pune, no parking, right? Just the building. We used to park on the street outside. My father lived in Shivaji Park, Dadar. No parking in the building. Few cars on the road when he was a kid. And he said, we used to know, inki gaadi hai, unki gaadi hai. But that's about it. Then, of course, the building that I live in, still construction, one layer of parking. Then it became 2. I'm hearing 3 now. So every flat must have 3 car parking lots. So perhaps your car park now may be bigger than your flat itself. That will happen at some point. But again, look to America to find out how crazy you can get. Because as you can see, this building is in 2 sections. Next slide. This is the lower part of it. So again, just like the lanes, is 5 enough, is 7 enough, is 10 enough, is 1 floor enough, is 2? This is not a mall, huh? This is a residential building. This is the amount of parking that you need if these are the policies that you follow. And America has said, this is the policy we are going to follow. It requires a lot of oil, and therefore it requires them to wage wars. It's all a consequence, sort of all links together, but that's how they operate. So this is what it is. You can imagine that in the daytime, once these people go to work, all of this will be empty, right? And there will be a similar parking lot at the workplace. And then in the evening, that will be empty. So every car actually requires 3 parking spaces, not 1. It needs 1 in where you live, it needs 1 where you work, and those are not the only 2 places you go. You'll also go to the cinema, you'll also go to the market, so you need 1 more. And some of it is interchangeable, but some of it isn't, because they are all used at different times. So each car needs 3 parking spaces in the city. So these are just logical conclusions of the policies of this. Yeah. This is an aerial photograph of Houston. This is a city, this is a state, Texas, which believes that you can do everything, you should be able to do everything in a car. Your first date in a car, fast food, so you can drive through, you don't have to get out of your car. You can go watch a cinema sitting in a car, because you have these, what are they called? These drive-in cinemas. They embodied this sense, I should not have to get out of my car. In Pune, we have that with the two-wheeler, right? कि two-wheeler से बिना उतरे मेरे को सब करने को आना चाहिए. So similar, but this is then sort of how that urban form. Remember, we talked about urban form right in the beginning. This is what then a city starts to look like. Each one of these is a parking lot, right? These are all people who drive, come here, and then they work in one of these buildings. This is what their city looks like. This is the highway on which they come here. I talked about vision in the beginning because a lot of people in Houston will say, it's fine, no issues. Maybe it is fine, I don't know. Is this the kind of city that we want, is the question. If you want it, this is how it will look, by the way. It will look like this. This is the logical conclusion every time I go to the PMC and they say, what to do? लोगों का aspiration है, हर एक को गाड़ी चाहिए. ठीक है, this is what your city will look like. Let's tell people कि ये ऐसा दिखने वाला है. It's going to be worse than this because our populations are higher than the US. We have 4 times the population of the United States, and we are what? One third the size or something like that. Of course, these things don't work at a national level. It's all about cities, but still, I mean, we have issues at another level altogether. Yeah. So we often say, you can't build your way out of congestion. Don't try to do that. Don't try to say that if there's congestion, I will build my way out of it. And that's exactly the kinds of policies that we're following now. Next. So then what? So we often say it's not about just fixing traffic problems. It is really about trying to think about what your city should be. How should it be? What kind of a city do I want to have? Do I want to have a city where a child can walk on its own and go to school? Or do I have to drive that child to school? I mean, all of these are options, but what's the kind of option that we want? So it's about fixing the city. You have to fix the city. You can't fix the traffic problem in isolation. Yeah. So this is often this mantra that is used. Design a city for people, not for cars. And it seems like mantra should be, it seems very deceptively simple, but it often has implications to it which are quite wide ranging. And that's the beauty of any good mantra, right? This is a city designed for people, not for cars. Yeah. I often say to my audience, if you don't remember anything from what I said during the hour or so, just remember this one slide. This is sort of, frankly, traffic and transportation theory reduced to one slide. Same number of people, about 50-ish people, if they all sat in a car, if they all used bicycles, and if they all sat in a bus. Same street, same people, different modes of transport. Road is full, road is not so bad. Road is empty. So really, the policy, transport policy is this. Anything that makes people go in that direction is good. It's good policy. Anything that makes people go in this direction, bad. So if I build a flyover, it makes it easier for a person to drive. It doesn't discourage someone from driving. In fact, the congestion was discouraging that person from driving. He was like, yaar, gaadi liya hai, lekin chalane ko kahin nahi hai. Now you build the flyover. Now it's like, oh, great, now I can drive. So you started driving. How does it help a cyclist if I build a flyover? For those of you who may be cycling, I do, it's not great. A flyover doesn't work for me at all. And it frankly doesn't work for a bus also. Because buses often don't use the flyover. They have to stop because buses want to get people on and off. So buses have to stop all the time, and they often stop at the junction so that you can get down, and then you often go the other way or whatever it is, or you cross the road or whatever that situation may be. So flyovers don't work for buses. They don't work for cyclists. They work only for cars. And hence, if you build a flyover, you're encouraging more people to drive. So it's this, not that. So when they built the flyover at University Chowk, for instance, Ganeshkan Road, the buses, if they use the flyover, had to now go much further. Then the police said, no, the bus stop can't be so close to the exit of the flyover because you're causing a problem. So we move the bus stop even further. So all the kids or students who are using the bus to go to the university now have to get off much further and walk back. So it doesn't work for them. It was meant for cars.
The handicap for the pedestrians has increased.
Has increased, you can't cross the road. I mean, it's a disaster. So think about whether our policies is basically conveying to people that it's easier now to use the bus, it's easier to walk, it's easier to use a cycle, or is it easier to drive? And if it's easier to drive, people will drive. That's the other part that I didn't talk about. It's not transport policy, it's human nature, right? Psychology, sociology, whatever. This was, I think, staged in a city called Münster, if I'm not mistaken. But this has been, this photo has been recreated by different people in different situations. On the internet, you'll find about a dozen or so of these photos. And so people will choose a mode, what I forgot to mention. People will decide how they will travel based on a few factors. It's usually convenience, comfort, reliability, affordability, and safety. So these are usually the 5 factors that people consider. Different people give different weightage to each factor, but comfort and convenience are often very high. Affordability still is an issue in India because a lot of people will not use a mode of transport simply because they cannot afford it. But as our country, obviously, it grows in its economy, lot more people will be able to afford driving and motorcycles, etc. And they will start using motorcycles and they will start driving. And safety is also an issue, especially for children, cycling. Often children don't care, but parents say, I won't send my child on a cycle because I don't think it's safe, and so on and so forth. So these are usually the 5 factors that people take into consideration. Environment is not one of them. Paryavaran Vachwa, cycle chalwa is the most useless statement ever invented. Nobody will cycle because you want to save the environment. Even people in Copenhagen don't cycle because they want to save the environment. They cycle for a different reason, and maybe I'll touch upon it next. So you have to do 2 things at the same time. This has to be part of the policy. not only must you improve public transport and non-motorized transport, you want more buses, you want good buses, you want cycle tracks, you want footpaths, but that is not enough to get people to use buses and cycles and walk. You must also make it inconvenient for people to drive. This is the bitter part of that pill, which most people don't like to hear about. Politicians definitely don't want to hear about that. But that's basically called the push and pull model. So you want to pull people towards using public transport, walking, cycling, but you also want to push people away. So you want to discourage driving. If you don't discourage driving, even though the metro might be great, if there's no problem to me driving, I'm still going to drive. Most people who said metro aane ke baad congestion kam hoga are people who are driving and who are saying that hopefully all these other drivers will go in the metro. मैं तो नहीं जाऊँगा, मैं तो गाड़ी ही चलाऊँगा. I bought a car. I didn't buy a car to go in the metro. I bought a car to drive the car, but all these other people are there. If they go in the metro, then my life will be better, so they should be metro. Unfortunately, all of them are saying that. So in the end, nobody goes in the metro. Who goes in the metro? The person who was in the bus now goes in the metro. Those who can afford it. And the congestion levels remain the same. Right? Which is why in Delhi, despite the fact that our metro has been a raging success, you ask any Delhiite, why are they building more flyovers then? Why more elevated roads? Because all those Delhiites who are driving are still driving. Most of them. I'm exaggerating a little bit. There may be some modal shift, but that is usually very small. So you have to also discourage people from driving. That has to be part of your policy. A quick look at these modes. Nothing great about what I'm going to say. Walking and cycling are great modes of transport. Especially if you want to have more public transport, anyway people have to walk. You simply cannot have a metro station or even a bus stop often right in front of your house. I mean, you might be lucky, but most of the times you're going to have to walk a little bit. Also, walking is great. People talk about the fact that it's very difficult to walk in India because it's hot, our weather is not conducive. This is not true. It's actually quite okay to walk in a city like Pune. Most of the year, the weather is good. For some of us who have lived in places like Chicago and Denver, it's a nightmare to even step out of the house over there. It's insanely cold. Places like London are cold, drizzly, not very nice. And so you can also design your streets so that it is much easier to walk also. And I'll maybe touch upon that a little bit. Cycling and walking, walking maybe not so much, but cycling is also not a short distance mode. You don't use cycling just to go like a kilometer. People like me cycle 6, 7, 8 kilometers. We're not interested in doing just short trips on cycles. In fact, in the Netherlands, there is cycling between two cities also. These cities are fairly close to one another, but people will cycle between cities also, and they have the proper infrastructure for that. So yes, this is great. So how do I curb? How do I discourage people from driving? The bitter pill, like I said, nobody likes this. So parking policies which are aimed at our parking policies often, it's very strange. Our parking policy is like there's not enough parking. Parking milne mein dikkat hai. That's why we have to create more parking. That's a parking policy. Not in these other countries. In these other countries, parking policies are meant to discourage people from driving, which means less parking available, expensive parking, hour-based parking, and ruthless about cars being towed if you're parked in the wrong place or for too long. So you really have to think twice before you park. In the US, it's a capitalist society. Parking is not subsidized. So all parking that is provided in the city is private parking. So guess what the person charges for parking? Market rates. What do you pay for an hour of parking in New York City? $30 an hour. If there's a baseball game, he might even hike up the price, because he's not there to provide subsidized parking. And there could be several parking lots and they're all competing with one another. So there's a market price that gets established. So the government doesn't control the parking price. Here the government says, no, logon ko afford nahi hoga, no more than 2 rupees for a motorcycle, no more than 5 rupees for a car. Why? It should be market driven, right? And then you can also have other things like car-free zones, areas where cars cannot go. ERP is electronic road pricing, which says that when congestion levels are higher, you pay more to drive on that road. When congestion levels are lower, you pay less to drive on that road. So it's all based on demand. So demand determines the pricing. These are very sophisticated systems, but this is what advanced countries are doing. Yes. This is what car-free areas can look like. This is an old part of town. This is, I think, in Peru, I think, maybe. But this could be Tulsi Bagh, right? A slightly better version of Tulsi Bagh. But actually, it's quite nice. You can go to the core city and you will have spaces like this, because the old city was built like that. It was not built for cars. It was meant for people to walk around. But this is what a new, modern, developed, from scratch city with a downtown area which is car-free could look like. And again, this is Bogota, the mayor whom we heard earlier. Germany, known for its autobahns, right? Those highways on which there are no speed limits apparently, but also developing cities where there's an autobahn. These are cities that are built without any cars at all. This is what a city might look like if there are no cars. The pavements look different. People walk differently. Now, we don't have enough time, but I could tell you about why this is the case. But then there is no motor carriageway. They are not walking on the side of the road. They're walking on the road, because that's all the space. We want to do what China does always, right? So China is now thinking about developing these satellite cities, which will be car light, or they will not have any cars, and people will walk and it will all be fancy. And in fact, this idea has existed for some time, which is called car-free cities. Can we have cities without any cars at all? Can we even imagine that? It used to be the case at one time. And thinking about all the issues that one has recognized with cars, is it because what we want is not a car, we want mobility. I want to be able to go to my college, I want to be able to go to my workplace, I want to be able to hang out with my friends, I want to be able to go to the marketplace. So if I can do all of that without having a car, the car isn't essential. It's my mobility, it's my access to services and goods and things that is more important. So J.H. Crawford wrote this book many years ago, I don't know when. This based in Nepal. There's something called the Car-Free Cities Alliance. There's a person from the Car-Free Cities Alliance here. They also talk about these things. Next. And of course, we need public transport, or mass rapid transit as they call it. Should you have a metro? Should you have trams? Should you have bus rapid transit? It all depends on the city, how much money you have, what kind of ridership you need, etc. Coming to the end of my talk. So essentially, to go from car friendly to people friendly. Remember that mantra? You want to design cities for people, not for cars. So this is designed for cars, that's designed for people. Again, the same Mr. Enrique Peñalosa from Bogota. Actually, he hasn't even changed the width of the street, but all the space that was being occupied by cars has been straightened out. The parking, instead of being angular, has been made straight, and a lot more space has been made available for people, which is what he wanted to do. Can you do this in big, important cities? Sure you can. If you have the political will, you can. So when you had Mayor Bloomberg of New York City, and he had a transport commissioner called Janet Sadiq Khan, they came in with these kinds of ideas. They wanted to create more cycle lanes, more pedestrian spaces. They wanted to reduce car accidents and crashes. So what they did is, this is often called a road diet. So same 3 lanes, but now those lane widths have been reduced. They make cars go a little bit slower, because smaller lane widths usually make people go a little bit slower, which is why you have higher widths on highways, because you want vehicles do go fast over there. So you carve out space from the existing space. What do? You make it public oriented. And remember when I said earlier, if you build more roads, you attract more cars. If you build more public spaces, you attract more people. Right? And if you want to create a people-centric city, this is what you do. The other thing that happens, I mean, this is a little technical, but the point where pedestrians come into conflict with vehicles is where you cross the road. Of course, in India, you come into conflict with them all the time, but you're not supposed to. You're supposed to be on the footpath, and they're not supposed to be on the footpath. But at crossings, you have no option. You will come into conflict with the vehicles. So safety people started saying, if I can reduce the exposure of pedestrians to cars by reducing the crossing width, then I have reduced the chance of a collision between a car and a pedestrian. So in fact, what this does is look at the width of the pedestrian crossing, the length of the pedestrian crossing in the above photo. It's quite a bit. That has been shrunk down quite a bit. So now pedestrians are safer because they can cross the street quicker when they're more likely to come into conflict with vehicles. And a classic example, you take out cars, you didn't have to send invitations, people just put their tables, cafes, people went for a walk. This is Times Square in New York. And they did this on an experimental basis, but eventually they've done this now in a more permanent way. It may not, I don't know if it's as drastic as this, but it's certainly a lot more pedestrian friendly than it used to be. And the last one, this is Seoul, South Korea. This is what they used to have, an elevated road. We are designing them right now in Pune. We want more of these things. Too many cars, air pollution levels went up. They weren't happy about it. A slew of policies were undertaken. And so the person actually who was the head of the company that built this elevated road eventually became the mayor, and he pulled down that elevated structure. Not surprisingly, it had been built over an old creek, an old waterway. I mean, Seoul must have had a waterway just like any other city. And so they rejuvenated that water body and created public spaces. What happened to those cars? Well, they have been systematically improving their public transport services. But also, when you build roads, you encourage more people to drive. When you do the opposite, actually, there is also something called traffic evaporation. People tend to travel less, or they will not undertake trips that they don't need to undertake, or two people will go together. There's a way of trips kind of disappearing also. You discourage people from moving about too much, and so you get less traffic. I don't know if this picture has been doctored, but definitely the air quality looks a lot better in the second picture compared to the first picture. And this is a great place for people to hang out in the evening. And God knows we all need a place to relax and to de-stress at the end of a long day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.